I stood there, drenched from head to toe, the sticky champagne stinging my eyes as 50 guests stared in silence. My son had just emptied his glass on me because I dared to ask for help with my medical bills. He called me a parasite while standing in the mansion he swore he bought with his own genius. He did not know that I owned the deed, his company, and the car outside. It was time to sell everything. My name is Eleanor Marsh. I am 58 years old, and my knees were throbbing as I navigated the crowded patio of the Sunset Crest Villa. It was my son Lucas's 35th birthday, and the party was in full swing at the house everyone believed he had purchased with his own genius. I carried a tray of empty glasses toward the kitchen, keeping my head down. To the 50 guests dancing under the LED lights, I was just a fixture of the background, a shadow in a grey dress that did not fit the aesthetic of a tech mogul's success story. The bass from the DJ booth vibrated against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. The infinity pool glowed a neon blue, reflecting the faces of investors, minor celebrities, and the entourage of my daughter-in-law, Bianca. Champagne flowed like water, likely costing more than what I used to make in a year of scrubbing floors. I tried to squeeze past a group of men in linen suits, but one of them bumped me aside without looking down. "Oh, do not mind her," I heard Bianca say to a woman holding a camera on a gimbal. "That is just Lucas's mom. She is staying with us for a while. You know how it is." I reached the service entrance and set the tray down, wiping my hands on my apron. Through the open sliding doors, I saw Lucas step onto the raised platform by the pool. He held a microphone, his face flushed with adrenaline and vintage brute. "I built this from nothing," Lucas shouted, spreading his arms wide to encompass the property I had signed the deed for 3 years ago. When my dad died, I had to grow up fast. I had to carry the weight of this family. I had to carry my mother. The crowd erupted in applause. "Self-made genius" was the phrase of the night. A silver-haired investor standing near the front raised his glass and shouted over the applause. "With your company's burn rate, have you thought about a trust for her just in case Lucas laughed?" A hollow sound that grated on my nerves. "Mum is fine. She survives." Bianca leaned in, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "She does not need money. She just likes the drama." My chest tightened. The medication for my heart condition was running low, and the specialized tests my doctor ordered last week were going to cost $3,000. I had been waiting for the right moment to ask him to sign the renewal for the family insurance plan, but there never seemed to be a right moment. I took a deep breath, smoothing my hair, and stepped out into the light. I approached the platform. The music dipped for a moment. "Lucas," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Money? I only want you to sign the long-term medical insurance, just in case." He stared at me. The adoration of the crowd had made him feel invincible, and my presence was a stain on his perfect canvas. He looked down at me with glazed eyes. "Mom, stop acting." He sneered into the microphone, his voice booming across the deck. "I cannot keep feeding a mouth that just takes. You are a parasite. If you need money, get a job. Stop clinging to me." A ripple of awkward laughter moved through the guests. Several phones turned in my direction, recording the pathetic old woman begging for a handout. I only wanted a little security. "Lucas," I said, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. "I gave my whole life for you. That was the trigger." Lucas's face twisted in anger. He grabbed a magnum of champagne from the ice bucket beside him. Before I could react, he upended the bottle over my head. The cold, sticky liquid crashed down, blinding me, soaking my hair and running down the back of my dress. The gasps from the crowd were audible, but no one moved. "I gave you a roof," Lucas screamed, throwing the empty bottle onto a lounge chair. "I gave you food. Everything. What more do you want? If you do not like it, then get out." I stood there, drenched and shivering, as the champagne dripped from my chin. I heard the whispers behind me. "She is a bit much. He has a point. You know." Not a single person stepped forward. I slowly reached up and wiped the liquid from my eyes. The humiliation burned, but beneath it, something snapped. The cord of affection I had held onto for 35 years finally broke. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. I smiled, and it felt like ice cracking. "Okay, son," I said, my voice low but perfectly clear. "I will leave. Soon." I turned my back on him and walked into the house, leaving wet footprints on the expensive tile, while the party hesitated behind me. 35 years ago, I was not the embarrassing old woman standing by the pool. I was a machine fueled by cheap instant coffee and desperation in the freezing winters of Ohio. Back then, I worked 3 shifts a day for a cleaning service called Bright Nest Facilities, and when my official shifts ended, I picked up under-the-table work scrubbing private rental units. I carried Lucas in a sling against my chest while I mopped, the smell of bleach becoming his lullaby. My husband was an electrician who was brilliant with wires but terrible with a bottle. He drank our rent money, and I cleaned other people's filth to earn it back. The shift in my universe happened on a Tuesday. My husband drove his truck through a storefront while drunk. To pay the damages and keep him out of prison, I had to sell everything. The television, the sofa, even my wedding ring. I remember sitting on the bare floor of our empty living room, feeding Lucas watery oatmeal, and realizing that nobody was coming to save us. Never again. I whispered to the empty walls, "I will never be this helpless again." I started hoarding every penny I found in the cushions of the couches I cleaned or under office desks. I befriended an old building manager named Mr. Henderson. He saw me reading a discarded newspaper in the trash about property laws. He taught me how to read a lease agreement, how to understand the fine print of a foreclosure, and how to spot value in the rotting industrial districts of Cleveland. I formed Marshland Holdings, LLC with $2,000 and a terrifying amount of debt. I was the CEO, the janitor, and the maintenance crew. By day, I scrubbed toilets at the bank. By night, I studied tax law and fixed leaking pipes in the foreclosure I had bought for pennies. We lived in poverty so I could build an empire. Lucas wore clothes from the donation bin and ate food that was 1 day away from expiration. He hated it. He would cry for the toys other children had. "Mum, why are we so poor?" he would ask, pulling at his frayed sleeve. "We are building..." "Lucas," I would tell him, scrubbing grease from my fingernails. "We are building a foundation." When my husband died of liver failure, I paid for a simple pine casket. I stood over his grave in the rain, holding Lucas's hand. I made a silent vow that my son would never be like his father. He would have a clean, decent life. He would never smell like stale beer and defeat. When the financial crisis hit, the world panicked, but I went shopping. While big banks collapsed, I used my cash reserves to buy houses for 10 cents on the dollar. I moved our operations from the Rust Belt to Texas and eventually to the Golden Coast of California. I bought land in Sunset Crest and Woodland Mesa when they were just dirt roads and sagebrush, knowing that one day the city would expand. By the time Lucas went to college to study software design, Marshland Holdings owned 4 apartment complexes and 20 single-family homes. But Lucas knew none of this. He believed we were barely scraping by. When he got into that prestigious university, he thought his tuition was covered by a patchwork of scholarships and his part-time job at the library. He did not know that the anonymous donor for the Sunshine Scholarship was his mother, writing checks from a shell company. I paid for his dorm, his books, and eventually the used Honda he drove to his first interview. I signed everything as a representative of a charitable trust. I watched him strut across the graduation stage, proud of his struggle, proud that he had overcome his poor background. I hid the millions because I was terrified. I thought that money would rot him just as alcohol had rotted his father. If he thinks I am rich, he will stop striving. I told myself as I filed the deed to another commercial building into my safe. If he believes he did it alone, he might actually become the man he pretends to be. It was a noble lie, or so I told myself. I wanted to give him character before I gave him capital. I did not realize that by letting him believe he was a self-made genius, I was feeding a different kind of monster. I had protected him from the struggle of poverty, but I had failed to protect him from the arrogance of success. And now, that arrogance was dripping off my dress in sticky, sweet champagne. Lucas graduated and secured a programming job in San Diego, but the novelty of a steady paycheck wore off in 6 months. He called me late one night, his voice thick with frustration. "Mom, I cannot do this 9-to-5 misery," he said, the line crackling. "I am suffocating here. I have an idea for an app. FinPeak. It is going to change how people manage money. But I need time." I told him to follow his dream. When he came to me a month later, eyes shining, claiming he was going to raise capital, buy a mansion, and bring me to live with him so I would never have to work again, I just nodded. I did not tell him that the seed money he secured the following week from the Marshland Angel Fund came directly from my personal savings account. I did it. "Mum," he shouted over the phone. Investors. They see the potential 2 years later. FinPeak was bleeding cash. Lucas was panicked, facing bankruptcy. He needed a miracle. I gave him one. I sat in my office at Marshland Holdings and authorized an injection of $750,000 in exchange for 51% of the company. I structured it through a shell corporation. When Lucas received the papers, he did not even look at who signed the bottom line. He just saw the zeros. An angel investor saved us. He bragged to his friends at a bar that weekend. They know talent when they see it. Then came the house, the Sunset Crest Villa. Lucas told everyone he was buying it with the profits from his Series B funding round. The reality was a quiet meeting in a notary's office downtown. I sat across from the seller and wrote a cashier's check for the full amount. Lucas was not even in the room for the purchase. He came in later to sign a separate document, a lease agreement between him and Marshland Holdings. "Why is the rent $1 a year?" he asked, skimming the document, his pen hovering. "Tax purposes for the holding company," the lawyer I hired explained smoothly. "Standard procedure for high-value assets." Lucas shrugged and signed. He never noticed that the deed remained in my company's name. He never noticed that the standard procedure meant he owned nothing but the furniture he bought on credit. I moved into the small guest room on the ground floor near the kitchen. I told him I was just staying temporarily to help out. perhaps to watch future grandchildren. This fit perfectly into the narrative Bianca was crafting for her social media following. She posted videos of the infinity pool and the marble countertops with captions like, "Our new sanctuary," and "So proud of my self-made hubby." Occasionally, I would appear in the background of her stories, a grey figure sweeping the patio. "Lucas is such a good son," her followers would comment, taking in his poor mom. Whenever FinPeak failed to turn a profit, which was often, Lucas would come home stressed. I would arrange for another soft loan from a subsidiary of Marshland. I would place the documents on the kitchen counter with yellow sticky notes indicating where he needed to sign. "Just more legal stuff. For the expansion," he would mutter, scribbling his name without reading a single clause. He drove a black sports car that he claimed was a reward to himself. In truth, it was a fleet vehicle registered to Marshland Holdings for executive use. The black card he used to pay for dinner was a corporate expense card issued to him as an employee, not an owner. The contract stated clearly that these were revocable privileges, but Lucas acted as if they were birthrights. The public saw Lucas, the millionaire tech genius who had dragged his mother out of poverty. I saw the truth. I was the 58-year-old woman checking the roof for leaks, filing the property taxes, and paying the insurance premiums from my small closet of a room. I wore old cardigans and ate leftovers while he feasted on the illusion I had bought for him. I had wanted to give him a head start, but instead, I had built a stage where he could play a king, never realizing he was just the court jester dancing on my dime. "You worry too much, Mom," he would say when I asked about his spending. "You do not understand how big business works." I would just look at him, biting my tongue, thinking about the quarterly reports I had reviewed that morning, which showed his big business was entirely sustained by my bank account. The irony was a heavy stone in my chest, but I carried it, until the champagne washed it away. The heavy bass from the DJ booth vibrated through the floorboards as I stood in the laundry room, stripping off my sodden dress. The sticky champagne clung to my skin, smelling of fermentation and humiliation. I caught my reflection in the utility sink mirror. My grey hair was plastered to my skull, and mascara ran down my cheeks like war paint. I looked at that woman in the mirror and realized that if I did not stop this now, my son would never respect a single human being on this earth, least of all himself. I walked to my small bedroom and locked the door. Behind a generic landscape painting on the wall, I keyed the code into my hidden safe. It opened with a soft, electronic beep. Inside lay the paper trail of my life, the steel skeleton beneath Lucas's cardboard kingdom. I pulled out the file, the deed of trust for the Sunset Crest Villa, solely in the name of Marshland Holdings, the Series B investment protocol for FinPeak, the lease agreement Lucas had signed 3 years ago without reading the fine print, the registration for the Italian sports car, and finally, a document I had drafted years ago but hoped never to use authority to liquidate assets without tenant consent. I picked up my phone and dialed Veronica Hale at Northline and Partners. It was 11 at night, but Veronica always answered for me. "Eleanor," she asked, her voice sharp with alert. "Is everything all right, Veronica?" I said, my voice devoid of the tremor I had felt by the pool. "I need you to prepare the paperwork. We are liquidating assets currently being misused by the occupant." There was a pause on the line, followed by the rustle of sheets. "By Lucas Eleanor. Are you sure this is extreme? Execute the sale of the Sunset Crest property. Revoke the vehicle privileges immediately. Cancel the corporate credit cards issued to Lucas Marsh and Bianca Marsh and Veronica. Pull the guarantee on the FinPeak credit line. Eleanor, Veronica said slowly. Legally, we can do this. He is just a tenant on a month-to-month lease and an employee with usage benefits. I can have the eviction notice and repossession orders ready by morning. But this will destroy his current standing. He will have nothing. Good, I said, staring at the wet dress on the floor. I do not want anything that could prolong the process. No delays. I hung up and sat at my small desk. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began to list the transfers. The proceeds from the house sale would bypass my personal accounts entirely and go straight into the Second Chances Trust. It was a fund I had established for people who had hit rock bottom and actually wanted to work their way up, not for those who started at the top and dug a hole. I took a piece of personal stationery and began to write a letter to Lucas. I wrote about the nights I scrubbed floors while he slept. I wrote about the 40 years of silence I had endured so he could feel proud. I wrote for 10 minutes, my hand cramping. Then I stopped. I looked at the ink on the page. Why was I still explaining he had just poured a bottle of wine on me in front of 50 people? He did not deserve the history lesson. I tore the letter in half. I threw the first part with the love and the explanations into the electric fireplace. I watched it curl and blacken. I folded the second half, the cold, legal reality, and slipped it into my pocket. The party outside was getting louder. I pulled a small duffel bag from under the bed. I did not pack much. Just an old photo album from our days in Ohio, a bottle of heart medication, 2 changes of clothes, and a cheap plastic watch Lucas had bought me with his first paycheck from the university library. It was the only thing he had ever bought me with his own money. I unlocked the side door that led into the garage. It was cool and quiet in there, smelling of rubber and polish. The black sports car sat under the fluorescent lights, aggressive and sleek. I ran my hand over the cold metal of the hood. I remembered signing the check for this beast, telling myself it would give him the confidence to face investors. We will soon meet again, I whispered to the machine. But not for him. I hit the button for the side exit and walked out into the night. An Uber was waiting at the bottom of the driveway, far away from the valet stand where Lucas's friends were parking their luxury sedans. I climbed into the back seat, whereto the driver asked. Marshland Holdings, I said, looking straight ahead, downtown. I did not look back at the villa. I had spent 40 years building a cushion for my son to land on. Tonight, I had just removed it. Now, we would see if he could fly. At 8 o'clock the next morning, the glass doors of the Marshland Holdings headquarters in downtown Los Angeles slid open. The receptionist, a young woman accustomed to seeing me only as a signature on digital memos, nearly dropped her coffee. I was not the frazzled, grey-dressed mother who had been humiliated 12 hours prior. I was wearing a sharp black blazer. My hair was pulled back into a severe bun, and I walked with the cadence of a woman who owned the ground beneath her heels. To the staff here, I was not Lucas's mother. I was Chairwoman Marsh, the recluse who built the portfolio, the shadow behind the young CEO, Daniel Cortez. As I walked toward the executive suite, spines straightened and conversations ceased. Daniel met me at the door of the main conference room, his face pale. He had heard about the party. Chairwoman, Daniel said, nodding respectfully. We are ready. I entered the room. Veronica Hale was there, along with our chief financial officer, Robert. I sat at the head of the table and placed the file from my safe on the polished mahogany. I want a full liquidation timeline, I said, skipping the pleasantries. We are severing all ties with the tenant at the Sunset Crest property and the founder of FinPeak. Today, Veronica adjusted her glasses, looking at the documents. Eleanor, we have options. We can issue a standard 30-day notice for the lease termination. For the car, we can request a return within 7 days. As for the credit lines, we are required to give 48 hours notice before a total freeze, unless we suspect fraud. I looked at her. I do not want him to have 30 days to liquidate the furniture or damage the property. I want a simultaneous notification. Serve the eviction, repossess the vehicle, and cut the credit cards all within a 24-hour window. Can we do that legally? We can, Veronica said, her pen hovering over her notepad. If we classify the vehicle use as a breach of company policy and the credit card usage as misappropriation of funds, it is aggressive, but it holds water. Do it, I said. Daniel leaned forward, looking nervous. Eleanor, Lucas is the face of FinPeak. If we strip him of the house and the car publicly, the tech blogs will have a field day. It will look like Marshland is cannibalizing its own portfolio company. The PR blowback? I have drafted a statement, I interrupted, sliding a piece of paper across the table. If the press asks, FinPeak is a venture that failed due to weak management and unsustainable burn rates. Marshland is simply exercising its rights as the primary investor to mitigate losses. There is no mention of family, no mention of mother and son, just business. Daniel read the statement and swallowed hard. It is cold, but it will work. I turned to Robert. Give me the final numbers. How much has he spent? Robert opened his laptop and projected a spreadsheet onto the glass wall. The numbers were staggering. In the last 3 years, Robert said, his voice flat, between the unauthorized marketing expenses that were actually vacations, the personal use of the corporate cards, and the soft loans, Lucas has burned through nearly $1 million. I stared at the number. $1 million. That was more money than I had made in the first 20 years of my life combined. My chest ached, a sharp physical pain, but I forced my voice to remain steady. Consider it. Tuition fees, I said. Now it is time to close the school. I spent the next hour signing documents. I signed the listing agreement for the Sunset Crest Villa. I signed the order to transfer the remaining liquid capital from the FinPeak accounts into the Second Chances Trust. I added a specific clause to the trust documents: beneficiaries must demonstrate financial insolvency and a viable business plan vetted by independent counsel. No direct withdrawals allowed. Lucas would never be able to touch that money directly again. When the meeting ended, the team filed out, looking shell-shocked. They had never seen me like this. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the sprawling grid of Los Angeles. Somewhere out there, Lucas was waking up in a bed he thought he owned, preparing to spend another day pretending to be a king. I touched the spot on my shoulder where the champagne had hit me the night before. You will have a chance to redeem yourself. Lucas, I whispered to the glass. But not with my money anymore. The 72 hours following the party did not happen in a blur. They happened with the precision of a guillotine blade dropping in slow motion. Lucas woke up the next morning with a skull-splitting headache, the taste of stale champagne still coating his tongue. He reached across the king-sized bed for Bianca, but the sheets were cold. She had already left to film content at a luxury spa, blissfully unaware that her membership was about to be declined. Lucas squinted at his phone. There was a notification from an email address he rarely checked: Sunset Crest Property Management. The subject line read, "Notice of lease termination." He sat up, the room spinning. He tapped the email. It was a formal letter stating that the owner of the property was exercising their right to sell the asset and that the tenant, Lucas Marsh, had 30 days to vacate the premises. "This is a mistake," he muttered, his fingers fumbling as he dialed the hotline number at the bottom of the email. A woman answered on the first ring. Her voice was professional and completely devoid of empathy. When Lucas screamed that he was the owner and this was a misunderstanding, she cut him off. "Sir, according to the records, you are the tenant on a month-to-month lease agreement. The owner, Marshland Holdings, has the right to terminate with notice. Please refer to page 4 of your contract." Lucas ended the call and frantically searched his old emails. He found the scanned copy of the lease he had signed 3 years ago, the one he had barely glanced at because he was too busy celebrating his Series B funding. There it was, in black and white. His signature sat directly below the logo of Marshland Holdings. He was not the king of the castle. He was just a guest who had overstayed his welcome. He threw the phone onto the bed and ran downstairs, needing to drive to the office to fix this mess. He burst into the garage, keys in hand, and froze. The space where the Italian sports car usually sat was empty. There was only a grease stain on the concrete and a clipboard resting on the workbench. The private security guard for the community, a man Lucas had tipped generously in the past, walked up the driveway. He looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Marsh," the guard said, handing him a receipt. "A tow team came by an hour ago. They had a repossession order from the corporate owner. Said the vehicle privileges were revoked due to policy violations." Across town, the humiliation was hitting Bianca in real time. She was standing at the counter of a high-end boutique, a pile of silk dresses on the counter. She handed the black titanium card to the cashier with a practiced smile. "Declined," the cashier said softly. "Try it again," Bianca said, her smile twitching. "It is a limit issue. Just run it again." It says, "Card cancelled by account holder." "Ma'am?" Bianca snatched the card back and called the bank. The representative informed her that the corporate account linked to Marshland Holdings had been closed to unauthorized users effective immediately. She stormed out to the parking lot where Lucas was just pulling up in an Uber. The argument that followed was loud enough to turn heads. "You told me you owned it," Bianca screamed, throwing her purse into the passenger seat of the Toyota Lucas had hailed. "You told me the house, the cars, the company. You said it was all yours." "I thought it was," Lucas yelled back, his face pale. I thought she was just the investor. I did not know she kept it all in her name." "You own nothing," Bianca hissed, her eyes wide with panic. "Even the wallet in your pocket. Did she pay for that too?" A teenager walking by held up a phone, capturing the entire meltdown. By evening, the clip was circulating on TikTok with the caption, "Tech bro exposed, mom owns everything." Lucas tried to call me. He called 10 times in a row. He sent texts that ranged from anger to begging. "Mom, pick up. Mom, this isn't funny. Mom, I am sorry." But my phone was off. When he called the Marshland office, The secretary put him on hold for 5 minutes before telling him that all communications must go through the legal department at Northline and Partners. He was being treated like a vendor with a bad invoice. The final blow came for his company. The lead investor for FinPeak's bridge loan called Lucas at 6 p.m. Marshland pulled the guarantee. "Lucas," the investor said, "without that backing, you are high risk. We are calling in the loan. You have 7 days to cover the balance, or we liquidate the IP." Lucas sat on the floor of the living room. The house was silent. Bianca had locked herself in the guest room and was posting a tearful story to her followers, talking about how toxic family members had blindsided them and abandoned them in their time of need. She was spinning a narrative of victimhood, inciting her followers to find the heartless mother who did this. But Lucas was not looking at his phone. He was looking around the room at the custom leather sofas, the 80-inch television, the art on the walls. For the first time, the illusion dissolved. He realized that if he walked out the door right now, the only thing he actually owned was the clothes on his back. "If she's not here," he whispered to the empty room, his voice trembling. "If she is gone, then who am I?" He had spent his life standing on a pedestal, never looking down to see whose shoulders were holding him up. Now that I had stepped away, he was free falling, and the ground was rushing up to meet him fast. Desperate for answers and fueled by a cocktail of denial and indignation. Lucas drove to the downtown branch of the bank where I had banked for decades. He marched up to the desk of Mark Ellis, my longtime financial advisor, intending to demand justice for his senile mother, who he believed was being manipulated by her company. "I need to see the accounts," Lucas demanded, slamming his hand on Mark's mahogany desk. "My mother, she is confused. She is signing things she does not understand. I need to take control before she loses her retirement fund." Mark, a man who had watched me turn pennies into millions, simply adjusted his glasses and looked at my son with pity. "Your mother is not confused, Lucas," Mark said softly. "And she certainly does not have a simple retirement fund. She is our largest private client." Lucas blinked, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. What are you talking about?" Mark turned his monitor around. He pulled up the public asset map of Marshland Holdings, the parts that were not shielded by privacy laws. It was a spiderweb of red dots spanning 3 states. Commercial complexes in Texas, residential blocks in Oregon, and high-tech parks in California. And there, buried under the section labeled Strategic Venture Capital, exited, was the logo of FinPeak. "She owns it all," Lucas whispered, his voice trembling. "She built it all," Mark corrected. "From nothing." Numb with shock, Lucas left the bank and drove to the Marshland Holdings tower. He had walked past this building a dozen times, never looking up. Now, he walked into the lobby and froze. There, hanging on the wall behind the reception desk, was a large black and white photograph. It was me, wearing a tailored suit, shaking hands with the mayor at a charity gala. The brass plaque underneath read, "Eleanor Marsh, founder and chairwoman." He bullied his way past the reception, demanding to see the CEO. Daniel Cortez eventually agreed to see him, not out of obligation, but out of a final courtesy to me. Lucas stormed into the conference room, looking small in the vast space. "This is insane," Lucas stammered, pacing the room. "You people, you are using her name. She is just a mom. She cooks lasagna. She does not run a conglomerate." Daniel sat calmly at the head of the table, his hands folded, Legally, Eleanor is not the mother living off her son that you described to your friends. She is your primary investor. She saved your company twice. And right now, she is the one mitigating the damage caused by your poor management. Daniel slid a thick binder across the table. It was titled FinPeak Audit of Discretionary Spending. Open it, Daniel said. Lucas opened the binder. His face drained of colour. It was a line-by-line accounting of every dollar he and Bianca had spent. You spent $40,000 on a team-building retreat in Cabo that included only you and your wife, Daniel noted, his voice devoid of emotion. You charged $15,000 for client dinners that were just birthday parties for your friends. Meanwhile, your R&D budget was cut by 20%. I worked hard, Lucas shouted, his voice cracking. I built the product I thought the money came from venture capitalists I did not know it was. Her money. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes sharp. The venture capitalist was your mother, Lucas. You never asked where the checks came from. You were too busy cashing them. Lucas staggered out of the office, the weight of the truth crushing his lungs. He drove back to the villa, the house he now knew was not his, and walked into the small room I had occupied. He tore the room apart, looking for something, anything, that would prove me wrong. He found a small wooden box tucked under the loose floorboard in the closet. Inside, there were no jewels. There was my first employment contract with Bright Nest Facilities, stained with coffee. There were flyers for foreclosure auctions from 30 years ago. There was a Polaroid of him as a toddler, sleeping on a plastic chair in the corner of a cleaning supply room while I mopped in the background. And then he found the letter, the one I had torn in half. He pieced the two halves together on the bedspread. He read my handwriting, shaky but determined. I hid the wealth because I wanted you to build your own character. Lucas. I wanted you to know the value of $1 before you knew the comfort of $1 million. But I failed. If you think you are self-made, you will never respect the struggle. And lately, you have become a stranger to me. Lucas stared at the paper. The silence of the house was deafening. For the first time in years, the arrogance that held him upright crumbled. He sat on the edge of the narrow bed and buried his face in his hands. Mom, he choked out, his shoulders shaking. Oh God, what have I done? The tears came then, hot and fast. He realized the humiliation at the party was not just his. He had humiliated the woman who had scrubbed floors so he could play CEO. He had called his savior a parasite. He wiped his face with his sleeve. He did not care about the money anymore. He did not care about the house or the car. He grabbed his keys. He had to find me. Not to beg for his lifestyle back, but to look me in the eye and say he was sorry before I disappeared from his life forever. Lucas stood in front of the peeling paint of the apartment complex in the working-class district of Los Angeles. This was where he believed his mother had lived before he rescued her. He knocked on the door of Unit 4B, expecting to see a landlord or a vacant room. Instead, a young couple, a high school history teacher and an emergency room nurse. They were holding hands so tightly their knuckles were white. They were terrified because they were about to sign a mortgage for 30 years, a commitment that felt like a mountain to them. We have lived here for 2 years, the husband said, looking confused. We rent directly from the corporate office, Marshland Holdings. The rent is subsidized. A neighbor, an elderly woman dragging a laundry cart, stopped when she saw Lucas. Are you looking for Eleanor, the sweet lady with the grey bun? She has not been here in months. She used to bring cookies for the kids. She told us she was just keeping an eye on the property management. Lucas walked away, his stomach churning. Every layer he peeled back revealed that his mother was not a helpless dependent, but the architect of the entire world he lived in. He took the first flight to Ohio, renting a cheap sedan to drive to the neighborhood where he was born. He found the old row house, now dilapidated. He knocked on the door of the house next door. Mrs. Gable, a woman in her 80s who had babysit him when he was a toddler, opened the door. Lucas, she squinted, her voice raspy. My God, you look just like your father? But you have Eleanor's eyes. She invited him in for tea. When Lucas asked about those early years, Mrs. Gable sighed. Your mother, she was made of steel. That one. After your father crashed the truck, she worked 3 shifts. She would come home, her hands raw from bleach, feed you, and then go back out. She paid off every cent of his debt. She never complained. Not once. She just said, I have to make it clean for Lucas. Lucas left Ohio and drove to the address of the old Bright Nest Facilities headquarters. It was gone, replaced by a sprawling concrete parking lot. He found a security guard booth. The guard, a man with white hair and a uniform that was too tight, nodded when Lucas mentioned the cleaning company. I remember the crews, the guard said, leaning back. There was one woman, Eleanor, I think. She always begged for the night shifts, said she needed the days to be with her kid. I saw her once, sleeping in her car for 20 minutes before starting a 10-hour shift. I felt like I was walking on her sweat every time I stepped on those clean floors. Lucas returned to Los Angeles, the image of his mother sleeping in a car burning in his mind. He went to the New Horizon Women's Center, a non-profit listed on Marshland's public tax returns. The director, a sharp woman named Sarah, welcomed him but offered no sympathy. Eleanor comes here every Tuesday, Sarah said, leading him through the hallway. She does not just donate money. She teaches financial literacy classes. She teaches women who have lost everything how to open secret bank accounts, how to repair their credit, how to stand on their own feet so no man can ever control them again. Lucas stopped walking. She teaches them independence. She teaches them survival, Sarah corrected. She tells them that money is not about luxury. It is about freedom. That night, in the empty villa, Lucas found the paperwork for the Second Chances Trust. He read the mission statement to provide capital for entrepreneurs who have experienced bankruptcy or systemic failure, provided they demonstrate a fundamental shift in lifestyle and ethics. He realized with a jolt that he was the target demographic. He was bankrupt. He was a failure. But the trust was designed so he could not access it. He was on the outside looking in. He spent the next night tracing Eleanor's recent banking activity. It was sparse. No big transfers, no luxury purchases, just small, consistent cash withdrawals from an ATM in a town called Harbor Ridge, located 3 hours north of the city. Lucas packed a small bag. He drove the rental car up the coast, leaving the smog of Los Angeles behind. Harbor Ridge was a quiet fishing town, smelling of salt and pine. The houses were small, weather-beaten shacks with porches facing the grey ocean. It was exactly the kind of place Eleanor used to talk about when she told him stories of her childhood. He parked near the main street and walked. The wind was cold. He saw a small diner at the end of the pier, its windows fogged up. He walked closer. Through the glass, he saw a figure sitting alone in a booth. It was a woman with silver hair, pulled back in a severe bun. She was wearing a thick, cheap wool sweater that he had seen her wear a dozen times before. She was reading a pink financial newspaper and taking notes in a small ledger. Lucas froze. His heart hammered against his ribs. He had spent his whole life thinking he was the sun, and she was just a satellite orbiting him. Now, seeing her sitting there, content and commanding in her silence, he realized she was the gravity that had held him to the earth. He took a breath, his hand trembling as he reached for the door handle. He did not know what he was going to say. He only knew that the rich boy was dead, and the son was finally ready to meet his mother. The diner smelled of stale coffee and salt spray. I watched Lucas walk from the parking lot, his shoulders hunched against the wind. He looked thinner than he had 3 days ago, stripped of the designer suit and the arrogance that used to hold his spine straight. He hesitated at the door, then pushed it open, the bell chiming a cheerful note that felt entirely out of place. He saw me in the back booth. I did not wave. I simply watched him approach. When he reached the table, he stood there for a long moment, his hands hanging uselessly by his sides. "Mom," he whispered. I looked up at him. I did not smile. "I thought you would find your way here eventually," I said, gesturing to the empty seat opposite me. "Harbour Ridge is where I always thought about starting over, even before you were born." Lucas sat down. He looked at his hands, then at me. His eyes rimmed with red. "I did not know," he stammered, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I swear. Mum, I did not know. I was drunk. I wanted to prove I was someone. I did not mean to hurt you." I turned my gaze to the window, watching the grey waves crash against the pier. I let his words hang in the air, unanswered. Apologies were cheap when the credit cards stopped working. "Take it back," he said, his voice cracking. "Please, take the company. Take the house. I do not want any of it. I will start over. I do not need the car. I do not need the title. I want to fix this." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was a tired expression, worn thin by years of secrets. "I have already done that. Lucas," I said softly. "The house is sold. The car is gone. The company is in liquidation. You are living exactly the life you said you wanted. You are standing on your own 2 feet. How does it feel?" He slumped against the vinyl booth. "It feels like nothing. I feel like I am nothing without it." "That is the problem," I said, locking eyes with him. "I gave you so much foundation that when I pulled it away, you realized you were just floating on air. You do not know who you are because you never had to build yourself." He wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "Give me a job. At Marshland. I will sweep floors. I will answer phones. I do not care. I just want to work. I will not use the name Marsh, please. Just give me a chance." "No," I said immediately. He flinched as if I had slapped him. "If I give you a job now, you will tell yourself later that you earned it. But deep down, you will know Mommy gave it to you," I said, my voice hard as steel. "You need a complete failure. Lucas. No shortcuts, no safety nets. You need to hit the ground so hard you taste the dirt." I took a sip of the cold coffee. "I have been watching you. For the last 3 days. I waited to see if you would sue me. I waited to see if you would sell a sob story to the tabloids. But you did not. You went to Ohio. You went to the cleaning company. You looked for me. Not my money. That is the only reason I am sitting here right now. Lucas looked down, shame coloring his cheeks. I sold the Sunset Crest villa yesterday. I continued. To a young couple, a high school teacher and a nurse. They have been saving for 10 years for a down payment. They cried when they signed the papers. They will cherish that roof in a way you never could. And the money, Lucas asked quietly. It went into the Second Chances Trust, I said. Every cent. It will help people who have lost everything to start again. But not you. Not yet. I reached into my bag and pulled out a file regarding FinPeak. Your company is being dissolved, I told him. However, I have arranged a severance package for your staff, the developers, the assistants. They were innocent in this. I have set up introductions for them with other firms in my portfolio. If they get hired, they get hired. If they want to bring you along as a junior coder, that is up to them. But I suspect you will have to apply like everyone else. Lucas nodded slowly, accepting the judgment. I stood up, smoothing down my wool sweater. I reached into my purse one last time and pulled out a thin envelope. I slid it across the table. What is this? He asked. Open it. He opened the flap and pulled out a single document. It was a standard lease agreement for a studio apartment in a nondescript suburb, miles away from the hills of Sunset Crest. The rent was low, the terms were strict, and the tenant line was blank. This is your restart, I said, picking up my bag. Try signing something that you actually pay for yourself, for the first time in your life. 3 days before I met Lucas at the diner, I sat in a conference room that smelled of fresh lilies and lemon polish. Across from me sat a young couple, a high school history teacher and an emergency room nurse. They were holding hands so tightly their knuckles were white. They were terrified because they were about to sign a mortgage for 30 years, a commitment that felt like a mountain to them. The inspections are clear, the realtor said, sliding a thick document across the granite table. The previous occupant, the tenant, has been given notice to vacate. The property will be professionally cleaned before handover. The husband looked up at me, his eyes wide. Mrs. Marsh, are you sure the house is? It is magnificent. We never thought we could afford a place in Sunset Crest. I picked up my pen. I remembered the leaks I had fixed in that roof myself, so Lucas would not have to deal with contractors. I remembered the nights I spent upgrading the electrical grid so his high-end gaming servers would not blow a fuse. Every inch of that house held a memory of my silent labor. I am sure, I said, my voice steady. It needs people who appreciate the foundation, not just the view. I signed the deed. With that ink, I severed the last physical tie to the fantasy world I had built for my son. When the papers were filed, I turned to the escrow officer. The proceeds from this sale, after closing costs, are to be wired immediately to the Second Chances Trust. I instructed. Do not route a single penny through my personal accounts. Lock it in. I wanted to ensure that even if my motherly heart softened in the future, the money would be beyond my reach. It was done. While I was boarding a bus in Harbour Ridge, Lucas was standing in the driveway of the villa. The sold sign was hammered into the manicured lawn. The young couple was there, measuring the windows for curtains. They saw him standing by the gate with his suitcase. Oh, the wife said, rushing over. You must be. Lucas, we are so sorry. We did not mean to push you out. Lucas looked at the house one last time. He looked at the balcony where he had poured champagne on my head less than a week ago. You did not take anything, Lucas said. his voice quiet. It was never mine to begin with. Good luck. He turned around and walked down the hill toward the bus stop, not looking back. My phone buzzed in my pocket as I took my seat on the intercity bus. It was a text from Veronica. Everything closed. You are officially out. I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I held down the power button. The screen went black. For the first time in 35 years, I had no alerts about Lucas's credit card usage, no notifications about FinPeak's stock price, and no emails about property taxes in Sunset Crest. I was offline. The bus engine roared to life. I had bought a ticket to Santa Fe. Marshland Holdings had some dormant assets there that needed a silent evaluation. But this time, I would just be a consultant. I would be a ghost. No one would know Eleanor Marsh was in town. I opened my wallet and pulled out the few things I had kept. A faded photo of Lucas as a baby, his arms wrapped around my neck. A picture of our first rental in Ohio with the peeling paint, and a photocopy of my first business license. I gave him every opportunity. I whispered to the empty seat beside me. I gave him the world. The rest is up to him. I put the photos away and closed my eyes. The bus merged onto the highway, speeding past the glittering skyline of the city. Down there, amidst those millions of lights, my son was signing a lease for a studio apartment he would have to pay for by sweating for every dollar. It was the harshest thing I had ever done, and yet, it was the only act of love left in my arsenal. I had destroyed his fake empire so he could finally build a real one. If he was rich without standing on his own feet, he was just a temporary tenant in his own life. Now, for the first time, he was free. And so was I. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please drop a comment below to share your thoughts, and let's get a conversation started. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this video reach even more people.